I just really wanted to know where the details of the poster came from the FBI. I did reach out and got a phone call back from one of the media liaisons at the Federal Bureau of Investigation. And my question was, where did they get these fingerprints from, and where would they have gotten Pearson's photo?
You better be watching. You better be watching in the dark. You better be watching.
Mr. Pearson invited me into the house, and I thought for a second, knowing what I know now, I could have been the fourth bag under the house.
I was the main witness. I had to tell them about everything that I found, and that I felt that they were under the house. And stared me down, and I just looked right back at him.
I'm Sonya Paz.
And I'm Marek Kospchik.
And we are your host of Investigated.
This podcast describes scenes of true crime details and may not be suitable for all listeners. Please be advised.
Hey there, listeners. Marek and I are really excited to have you here, and we just wanted to let you know that if you are new to listening to Investigated and you have just started listening and happen to pop in on these later episodes, you definitely want to go back and start from the very beginning. This is a multi-episode series, so to capture the true essence of the story, you definitely want to start from episode 1, which is the More Than a Feeling episode, and that's going to start you off chronologically so that you really have a great concept of what the story is about and you can follow along. This way you have a whole lot of episodes to catch up on, and it's great binge listening. We are so happy that you're here, as we want you to remember the Pearson ladies as we do. So enjoy the show.
Welcome back, everybody, to Investigated. We're going to be listening to episode 13 coming up, and I'm welcoming Sonya back to the podcast. How are you, Sonya?
Hey, I'm pretty good. Marek, how are you doing?
Very good. We're going to be doing a Recollections episode today, which is kind of cool. People that we've spoken with, information that we've received, and we're going to give everybody little tidbits of updates on all of it. It's kind of wrapping up a whole bunch of little tidbits that were asked from listeners that we weren't able to answer, and then some updates as well from people who have been involved in the podcast, who have been interviewed, and that sort of thing. So, Sonya, why don't you go ahead and start us off?
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, there has been a lot of questions over the past few weeks. Some I did not have answers for, some that you and I have discussed and had some theories on, but we wanted to tackle this and make sure that we had addressed questions because I love answering questions. And when people send information over, even if it may or may not sound like it's something that is feasible or was part of the investigation or part of the story, I always want to make sure that we do its due diligence and check it out because you just never know. There's a lot of great information that we have been able to uncover, and I'm just going to dive right into it. So one of my friends, Laura, she's married to Bill, and he's Bill Hanlon. And when we first started this podcast and we started unpeeling all the episodes and getting into the root of the story, Laura had reached out to me and said, Sonya, my husband Bill was a friend of a guy who rented that house. And of course, the house that we are referring to is the home there at 62 Claremont in Santa Clara. He remembers that house. So we got on the phone and Bill and I spoke, and he said that he had a friend named Richard Newberger, who used to rent that house. And he also had a roommate by the name of Scott. And he and I had spoke as well. And he said he remembers living in the house around 1970, but they only lived there for a short while. And it was kind of like a party house. We'll just say that. If you remember the late 60s, early 70s, I think y'all know what I'm talking about. Don't you know what I'm talking about, Mark?
That was kind of before my time, but yeah, my brothers and sisters were in that era.
Okay. So yeah, well, I'll say that for me too. He does recall that the house had a pool, and we are talking about the same house because on that street, that house definitely has its own look. So it's not, like a lot of the condos and how houses are now, they look the same. This was very identifiable. He said that he would hang out with Richard and Scott, and they were a bit older than him, but he does remember some of the urban legend stories that those two had told him. And at one point, he said that Richard had bought a lot of pot and they didn't know where to store it. So they stored it under the house in the crawl space. And Richard has passed away. In speaking to Scott, he said that when they had learned about the bodies back in 74, amongst all of these guys, it kind of talked and said, oh my God, we could have been feet away from the bodies and did not know it. So that was pretty interesting. So between Bill and Scott, the storage story of infamous bag of pot was corroborated. I found that to be really interesting just because they had lived there in the 70s, and that's soon after then when Pearson left. So they lived there for maybe, he said, less than a year and then moved on. But when the story hit the airwaves, then of course people really got to talking. So many thanks to Bill Hanlon and to Scott to refresh their memories and to share their story with us.
Yeah, and also, like you said, pretty creepy because if they were storing their pot in the same spot that the bodies were in, they could have ran across that very easily, but didn't. And so that's why we didn't have very much physical evidence when the police finally got involved.
Right. Yes. I know. It's one of those things you think, gosh, there they were under our feet the whole time. And, pretty crazy.
Yeah. So what else do you have?
I also heard from Leslie. She also attended Cupertino High and was from the Santa Clara area. Her sisters were mutual friends of Paula, and that's how she remembers them. But Leslie had come across our podcast, much like Kathleen Wilgamot, who we spoke about a couple episodes ago, happened to Google Pearson one late night and came across our podcast and, of course, reached out to us on the website and had questions. She and I spoke a couple of times and had been texting back and forth. And funny thing is that she has always wanted to do a story about this. And so in talking with her, she and I had a lot of the same research that we had done. When we had discussed this case and everything, she was surprised about where Pearson had ended up and the whole journey of where he was living and his lives and how he got caught. And she also says that she remembers hearing about this random story on the radio. She was driving maybe just a couple of years ago, and she thinks it was like a college radio station or maybe some type of NPR newscast that was talking about the Utah area. And she said that it was about Pearson, but it was not about the murders. It was more about his time in Cedar City and probably more about his embezzlement and how he did all that shady financial stuff with that land and cattle company. And I did try to locate this radio show, or I scrubbed the internet trying to find anything about NPR doing a story about James Arthur Pearson or Albert Four or anything like that, and also looked into different college radio stations, but I could not find anything. And my thoughts on it, Mark, is that it just may not have been recorded, or it might have just been something that was just really random. She said that she does not remember what it was called. She just remembers it had like two women co-hosts talking about it, and that was kind of it.
Yeah, it could have just been a sidelight, and then maybe they didn't keep records or recordings from way back then.
Yeah. I mean, she did say it was a couple of years ago. So, but everybody does things different. And some older stations, they don't want to get up with the time. So you just, you never know. Who knows?
You got to dig, and sometimes it doesn't lead to anything.
Right. Right. But Leslie, she is a retired librarian. And as I said, also went to Cupertino High. And she knew uh, Rick and Julie Shallow, who was Peter Shallow's brother. Because if you do remember, we spoke about him regarding the whole trial. I think it was the Garden of Eden episode. And he was questioned by the police and had given a statement. So that is kind of where he fits in and of the Shallow family. So many thanks to Leslie for her contribution on sharing that story with us.
Yep. Thanks, Leslie.
Marek, when we discussed the Garden of Eden episode, I think we spent hours and hours talking about how that whole episode was going to be unraveled and what we were going to talk about. And we had come up to that whole list of the jurors. And you know me, I'm going to find any juror that I think will talk to me or could remember this. And bingo, did we ever? So juror number 1, lovely woman who I spoke to. She's 83 years old. And again, I am just thrown about the amount of amazing information that these people have kept in their minds about this case. And I asked her if she remembered it. She said she did. And I asked her just a little bit about how did she feel about being a juror on that type of a trial. And according to my notes, she remembered a lot of things, but some things that she didn't remember and some things she was frustrated with. So basically, they were there for the degree of the charges, not the fact that he was innocent or not innocent. And that is kind of where they started from. They were establishing the level of manslaughter versus first degree, and they were determining any type of crime that he had confessed to already. She does not remember Arlene being on the stand because I had asked her, do you remember when Arlene was on the stand? She was the second wife, and she was very limited to what she could testify to, and she said she did not remember her. And I asked her about how old she was when she was on the jury, and she was 37 years old and said that the case did definitely resonate with her. She has thought a lot about it over the years, and she was more interested to hear about our story and what we're doing. And she also found it very curious and concerning that it took them 4.5 years before they found the bodies. She was really surprised that every time the house was sold and that there was an inspection done, that they did not find them sooner.
As I would be too.
She did not know that there were more inspections that were signed off on that just resulted in nothing. And it gave her a lot to think about. And she also shared from her own personal experience in having their own home that she has had inspections. And sometimes, more often than not, it was a mismatch of what was necessary or what was found in an inspection versus what was necessary and what was not okay. So I think that is really great information. Many thanks to her. I'm just going to refer to her as juror number 1. And I am thankful for these people who still remember things and have shared their experiences with us.
It's always interesting to me as an investigator and working with attorneys who take cases to trial, what goes on in the jury room, where the juries start from, what they're thinking, because you never really know what a group of 12 will decide is the starting block for looking at a case with all the evidence. And I just thought it was interesting that she started out with not the fact that he was innocent or not innocent, but that they wanted to establish whether he was guilty of manslaughter or first degree based on his confessions. So they based a lot of what they decided on the confession that he gave to the FBI.
Right. Yeah.
And not what he said, basically, not what he testified to, but what he confessed to.
Correct. Yeah. And of course, as we've talked, we will really never know everything that happened that day.
Nope, we won't.
Many thanks to juror number 1 for her contributions to this story. I have collected dozens of articles throughout the years about this case, and because I don't sit still and my mind is going, 3,000 miles an hour all the time, as you know, that in looking at some of the periodicals and archives of these news clippings and everything, there was very limited amount of photographs, but what the photographs that were taken were very, very grainy. And these were basically of Pearson. There was two, and they're on our website in the show notes section. If you want to look at those show notes for each episode, there are a couple of photos from two different articles over the period of time of Pearson. There are photos of him in his prison outfit and his handcuffed, shackled hands and arms and everything. I wish that I could find the actual photographs. So I went investigating again, and I did see that the photo credit on these photographs was from E13, and he was the photographer for the Mercury News that took photos of Pearson at the trial. I want to take a quick little side note to celebrate Emil Edgren for his work. He was more than just a photographer for the Mercury News. His artistic career began many, many years ago and had officially started when he had received a large scholarship from the California School of Fine Arts, which had started his career. And he was a photojournalist documenting the events of World War II and was a member of the U.S. Army Pictorial Service for about 4.5 years. And he was a contracted photojournalist for other papers like the International News Photos, the Associated Press, and the United Press International. The San Francisco Call Bulletin, the San Francisco Examiner, of course, the San Jose Mercury News, and those were just a few of the news organizations that contracted Emil for his photojournalism services. I'm going to put a link on to his website that shows a photo of him looking very dapper and handsome in his official photographer uniform when he was in the service. And on there are just a few photos of albums that he took through France and Germany and World War II training and just some things like that. And his work was also featured on different other types of networks like the Warfare History Network. He had published a book called 3:01 p.m. Pacific Wartime that is available on Amazon. So Emil had a lot more going on than just taking photos of Pearson during the 1978 and 79 trials. So much applaud and gratitude for Emil's work and his service, as well as providing images of history that he had captured through his lens. Since this last few years, Emil has passed away. However, I did find that he had sons in the area, and I reached out to them to see if they had any archives from the Mercury News or any archives of photographs that their father took. And as a daughter of a photographer, because my dad was a photographer, and after he had passed away, I'm going to tell you that photographers, that is their life. Click and snap and develop, and print, and develop. You'll find multitudes of the same image in 5 different folders or whatever. But I wanted to see if there was an archive that maybe Emil kept, something maybe chronological or anything pertinent to his work that he had done for the Mercury News. And unfortunately, his son said that they did not have any of that. So I don't know if Emil had donated those. I haven't gotten that far yet. However, in reaching out to the archivist of the Mercury News, I did speak with someone and she was really helpful. Unfortunately, because I think the internet has traveled faster than people can probably archive decades of information through different types of news sources, the Mercury News has not been able to convert a lot of this over to digital files. They typically don't work from, 1930 to the current date. They go from the current date and they kind of start going backwards. And as you can imagine, it's a lot harder to sort of catch up with those articles from decades ago. So I did offer. I said, "Hey, if you want help, I'll happy to come over and dig through those, those cold storage and help you out." And she laughed and she said, "Oh God, if we can only do that." But it's a project that they are continuing trying to work on. So I was not able to get better photographs. However, I think you and I had discussed that because those photos were so grainy, it almost adds to the kind of creepiness factor of the patina of those photos that they published. Don't you think?
Absolutely. Yeah, those were it does give a certain aura of what we're doing. That's for sure.
Right. If anyone goes back and looks at the show notes for episode 10, which was the portrayed as an ogre episode, that photo of him, he's sort of looking off to the right. And I had to clean that up. It was really grainy, and I just removed a lot of it's like the copy of a copy of a copy, that you get that really weird kind of mass distortion or noise on the photo. So I had to go in and clean that up quite a bit. Then, of course, last week's episode with Esther, episode 12, Once Upon an Annihilator, that is from another photo that he had taken in the 70s. So, hey, you know what? I tried.
You did fine. It looks great. Like it's a different perspective on the case.
Right. So many of you know also from visiting the website is that we've talked about the famous FBI photo. I just really wanted to know where the details of the poster came from the FBI. And I made some phone calls. I was on a roll, and thankfully I'm persistent because I feel it paid off. I did reach out and got a phone call back from one of the media liaisons at the Federal Bureau of Investigation and told her about the poster that I had. And my question was, where did they get these fingerprints from, and where would they have gotten Pearson's photo? She said, let me research a few things. She called me back and she said that the FBI probably got the fingerprints from his military ID because he was in the Coast Guard. And his photo was probably either from a California driver's license or from the state of Oregon. They weren't from the same thing. It wasn't like he was caught and booked on something else and let go. She said a lot of the times they piece these things together, and that's where they create those posters from, or the collateral necessary to try to apprehend somebody in these types of situations.
Sonya, I thought when you contacted the FBI that they probably wouldn't give you any information, but they ended up doing that. And so knowing those little tidbits of where those came from, his picture and his fingerprints and that is quite interesting.
Take a shot. I'm going to let our listeners know that every time we repeat a word, Mark and I laugh when we say take a shot. I think by the end of some of these episodes, I think we would be pretty toasted.
Yeah. I'm going to my thesaurus right now.
Thank God. Try to say thesaurus after taking a shot. And I don't drink that often. And whenever someone prepares a shot for me, I have to just sort of sip it or slowly add it to a drink that I'm having or whatever. I just don't have the stomach for that kind of stuff. But I'm usually the person that will just say, I will cheer you on and I will be your designated driver. So.
Yeah. And so here I'm looking at the synonyms for interested. And it's like, I wouldn't use any of those in speech.
What do they say?
It's attentive, intent, focused, absorbed, engrossed, fascinated, riveted, gripped, captivated. Well, I guess there are some in there that maybe I would use.
I like captivated.
Yeah, but it's got to be in the flow of the word, the sentence that we're like dealing with. So when I say, so Sonya, when you got that information from the FBI, which I didn't think you were going to get, I felt that the info you got was captivating on his photo and fingerprints. There we have it.
There we have it. Or
lock and load.
Engrossed. That's very engrossing.
Intrigued. I guess intrigued. Sonya, that information that you got from the FBI about the photograph and the fingerprints were absolutely intriguing.
Yes. I would concur.
What else we got? Related, partisan, partial, biased, prejudiced, one-sided. Yeah. All right. I'm just going to keep that up. So when I think I'm going to use the word interested, I'm going to see which one of those fit into the box.
You got to check it out and keep that bottle available and that shot glass empty.
Hopefully.
Okay. I know we rarely ever joke on this podcast, but I think that was warranted. Explain a few things behind the scenes to our listeners. But anyway, back to the story. And based on what the FBI had given me over the phone, it kind of goes now in parallel to a listener question from Linda that had asked about back in episode 8, the one titled James, Albert, and George, the Families and the Aftermath. We spoke about the poster, and we did speak about how those social security numbers came into play. And many thanks to Linda, who is a friend of mine, and she said, whatever happened with researching those social security numbers? Tell us, Mark. I know that you had been researching this, and we just are now getting to fill in the blanks, but tell us about how that all turned out.
Yeah. On the FBI wanted poster, there were 4 social security numbers that they listed on the wanted sheet. None of the 4 social security numbers that were listed were actually Pearson's social security number. They were all of different people. And so we had 2 social security numbers ending in 0675 and ending in 0678. Both of those very similar as to the first 3 digits, and the middle 2 digits were exactly the same, and then just 1 digit off on the last number. And those 2 socials, one was from Terrebonne, Oregon, and the other one was from Cleveland, Ohio. One of those socials currently is used by someone in Ohio by the name of Adrian, and obviously I'm not going to go into their last name. The other person's social security number goes under the name of Priscilla. She has since passed away in 2008 at 85 years old, and that was the one that was from Terrebonne, Oregon. Now, there's a third social security number that was also from Baker City, Oregon, and it was ending in 0618 with the same first 3 numbers and the second 2 numbers being exactly the same. And that person is deceased as well back in 2009. But that belonged to a person named Henry, again, out of Baker City, Oregon. The last social security number, which was completely different, was based out of Utah, we found out, was truly Arlene's social security number. So now we have verification of that. And we have some additional information that we're going to give you guys on the next episode as well. So Pearson started getting these social security numbers when he first became married, and who knows in his businesses how he became aware of these social security numbers in Oregon. But there were 2 in Oregon, 1 in Cleveland, and then we have this other one who's attached to Arlene in Utah. So again, never used his own social security number, used one of these 4.
Right. And in one of our earlier episodes, we did talk about this because I think one of my questions was, couldn't they track him through his social security, his numbers? And we had learned that that does not necessarily mean that law enforcement works with the Social Security Administration on tracking people. Those are 2 different agencies, and they don't necessarily play together.
Right. There's a lot of confidential information with the Social Security office and your Social Security card for good reason.
Right. Even in crimes, a lot of people have said, how could he have been using different socials or have used somebody else's? Because it was easy. It was super easy to just fly under the radar back then and to assume somebody else's identity. And everyone, especially listeners of a certain age, things are different now. I mean, everybody is banking online. This was just a whole different time frame. And one of my favorite movies, I'll just say this, is Leonardo DiCaprio and Tom Hanks' movie, Catch Me If You Can. That
Right.
is an amazing movie. It was based on a true story of Frank Abagnale and how he just started scamming the system at an early age and, did everything from become a doctor, a lawyer, a Pan Am pilot to a whole variety of different other types of professions. And based on confidence and just learning how to do it or learning as you go, he mastered it. He obviously ended up going to prison, but then with that said, he ended up working for these agencies to help with security on checks and how to get ahead of the curve and learn all those security breaches and help patch those together. And so he actually was an asset to the FBI back in the day and other banking agencies. So I think that's one of my favorite movies. And if people haven't seen that, it's not what Pearson was doing, not quite, just on a different flavor, but entirely different time where you could use somebody else's social. And it probably took a long time for people to track you down. But what he was doing, he was floating and he was moving. So I think by the time that they caught whiff of what he was doing, he was gone, had a different name, had a different family in a different state.
Right. And Pearson used his savvy how to just come up with an easy excuse on how he lost his identification. And people that he hung out with in the church community were totally willing to help him. And so he was believable. And so he went from one ID to the next ID to the next ID, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely. Well, thanks, Mark, for explaining that and for doing the research on these socials and getting some answers for everybody. And thanks to Linda for asking the question, reminding us.
Right. Perfect. We love to answer questions for sure.
Awesome.
What do you got next, Sonia?
All right. So a big shout out to my childhood friend, Janet Eason Montiel, and her niece, Erin Ashby. Janet had learned about our podcast and she said, Sonia, my sister Chris, who has since passed away, so sorry to hear that. She said, my sister Chris was friends with Paula and they were both in many of the same clubs at Cupertino High. And her niece still had a lot of the yearbooks from her mom. And she helped me kind of put together some answers that I was looking for. And so she had looked in and found that her mom, Chris, and Paula were both on the Cupertino High School newspaper. It was called The Prospector because our school mascot was like a little miner, like a little pioneer. So everything was around the yearbook was called The Nugget. The newspaper was called The Prospectors. And Paula was the editor-in-chief of the paper in 1969. But I just want to tell you all that she was in a variety of clubs. She was in the Cupertino High School Altruettes, which was a service organization open to girls who excelled in scholastic and extracurricular activities. It was one of those types of groups that every year the girls hosted a brunch dessert for faculty, entertained faculty's kids at Christmas, put on fashion show and that type of thing. And so I had also reached out to Wes Morse, who is the historian for Cupertino High School. He and I had worked on another project that he had done for one of the teachers, Gary Bianchini, who had passed away a number of years ago. And I had some information I was able to provide for him, some memories of Gary and his family and some other things. But I had reached out to Wes because I didn't see much about the word Altruettes. It seemed to be something that might have been exclusive to Cupertino High School. And he basically had said that it was a group that started in the early days of Cupertino High and slowly faded out in around 1993 due to declining enrollment. And I think that was probably most likely due to other types of groups involved with community social clubs, environment, and other service and diverse clubs at the high school. So she was also involved in the California Scholarship Federation Honors. Those are students who have excelled in the classroom. Over 500 schools that are affiliated with the organization through state memberships based on grade point average and given to members have met certain CSF requirements. And it's a whole thing. And she was involved in that. And if you want to know more about that, I'll put the California Scholarship Federation information in the show notes. But I saw that she was in all of the photos for all these different clubs. Oh, she was in the German club. She was in the newspaper staff. She was also in the French club. So she was very involved in school. She was very involved, and she just looks like a beautiful, bright, shining star right out there with her big smile. And, it just really pulls at my heart because these are beautiful photos and these are of her and all of the other classmates, and that she really aspired to become something pretty special. I did look for things about Marianne, but at the time she would have been in elementary school, and there really is not a lot about Marianne. So again, if anybody grew up with her and remembers things or have yearbooks or any information about Marianne in the Santa Clara, Cupertino, Pendleton, Salem, Oregon, or even the Seattle area or beyond, please let Mark and I know.
Yeah, I think Paula was an aspiring student who did really well. It looked like she had a huge, bright future ahead of her in doing whatever she wanted to do. And it's just too bad that her life was cut short.
Absolutely. And I'm sure because in 1969, Marianne had just literally weeks before Pearson killed them, she had started Cupertino as a freshman. And like I said in our past episodes, I know that she would have been something very creative and that she and I would have connected. We would have stayed in touch our whole lives, but she obviously didn't even get to start to do anything at high school because of what happened.
Right. It's a shame. Truly
It is a
shame.
shame. So just a couple things more here is I, in doing more of my research, had found reporter Scott Herhold's article in the San Jose Mercury News. And this is just offbeat, but I found it kind of interesting. Now, I found this very, it kind of ties in with this in a really kind of strange way. Scott wrote an intriguing article about a reporter named Gil Bailey. And I located this article, and during one of Gil's writings about the Watergate scandal in 1972, he said that Gil was assigned to Washington, D.C., and it was around this time, amid the presidential campaign, that Bailey became involved in a case of mistaken identity. During a campaign stop in Milwaukee, he had lost his driver's license at a pub, and whoever found it thought Bailey matched the photos of James Arthur Pearson, a man wanted for murdering his wife and 2 daughters in Santa Clara, California.
Very intriguing.
Isn't that? And I did reach out to Scott Herhold, and as of this recording, I have not heard back from him, but found that to be kind of cool in a way, not to be ID'd as a mass murderer, but that here we are in Milwaukee, and that he had heard about the story.
Yeah. And that people are looking for him and aware of what he looks like.
And what he had done.
Yeah.
Apparently, Gil had the same type of horn rim glasses that Pearson wore. But I mean, if you look at any of the photos of large corporations or people in politics or news reporters back then, if you ever watch like the Apollo, footage or anything, everyone's got those glasses on. But
the Drew Carey look, right?
The Drew. What is it? Superman, Clark Kent. We used to call him Clark Kent, but
yeah.
So shout out to Scott and to Gil and whoever found that driver's license of Gil's back in Milwaukee in 1972.
Very cool.
So one of the last things is I wanted to mention again Arlene's daughter, Vicky. She and I do connect. She checks on me maybe every 3 weeks or so, just checking in that she's listened to the podcast, has some questions. And We had spoke a few weeks ago about that cluster muster of the police in Cedar City who didn't do enough for the Roosh family, overall the bad communication, and not only in Cedar City, but also in Biloxi. And this also goes toward the police force in Utah, the sheriffs. And of course, she also feels that the FBI had also dropped the ball on a number of things. And if you remember, he was seen in Canada and was apprehended there for some reason. So, that was a disservice too, is that the ball was dropped from the Canadian authorities. And so she had described a scene to me that made me laugh out loud. It was more or less is when she thinks about this case, she thinks of the Three Stooges. If you think of a Three Stooges episode where they're all dressed up like cops and they're just bumbling about each other, they don't know which end is up and they're just fumbling. That is what she pictures when it comes to how the police in Cedar City and the Biloxi police, when it came to the disservice of the issues with this whole thing, especially in Biloxi when even trying to do the serving that the sheriff's department failed to do. There was so much chaos and disorganization. And I somehow feel that there was something really strange with that scenario. Vicki and I had spoke about this, and I think that maybe the police had tipped the Watson family to get out of town just because of the crazy timing. And, it was, I don't want to say a good old boys club back then, but, those are my suspicions. And because it just seemed so bizarre that they just up and left right after they were supposed to have that done. So, do the math. You all can come to your own conclusions. But she and I both feel that that was yet again another disservice to the Roosh family and a slap in the face. And it just altogether just didn't go down very well. But aside from that, too, is that this was a very hard time for the Watson family. Probably didn't really know what to do. This all came over like a bulldozer to that family. And I'm sure that she was advised maybe by an attorney, maybe by the officers and the sheriffs and people that they knew really well in the community. There was probably a lot of different factors. There was probably a lot of attention drawn to them, probably neighbors and people that they knew from church. There was probably a lot of reporters and people like that just really wanting to get a statement. And Jacqueline did what she probably needed to do, was just to get out of town and maybe return later after the dust settled. I don't know. We don't know. But it's what happened. And everything with that is buried with Jacqueline. Of course, it's also buried with Pearson. So we may never know. But having a suspicion or having a theory, it's not a bad thing. But with everything happening, and there was just so much craziness going on, who's to say what had happened? And there was a lot of miscommunication, and it just was a hot mess.
Yeah, I think if they would have done their job correctly and served her with the papers and the subpoena to come to court, this whole thing with David could have turned out a little bit differently.
Yeah. But yeah, I can't think about the Three Stooges now without thinking about that, And if anybody is a fan, you'll know what we're talking about.
It's pretty funny. It is. And I could totally see that episode of the Three Stooges running around the Keystone Cop thing.
Yep.
Well, thanks for the updates.
That is amazing. Good work. Good work. And many thanks to Vicki for her contributions to the story as well. Yeah. And one last thing is that Clark Williams sent this to me, and I'll put it up in the show notes of this week's page, is that he had found an advertisement for Farmers Insurance Group. And it's kind of funny talking about photos. We haven't seen many pictures of Pearson smiling, but there is a Farmers Insurance Group business is expanding ad, and it says, announcing your new South Bellingham office of the Farmers Insurance Group at 1400 12th Street. Get this, their phone number is 1038. How old is this thing? And it says the new office will be under the capable management of Mr. Jim Pearson and will enable us to do better and to serve many of our friends and policyholders in the area. You are urged to consult Mr. Pearson regarding your auto, truck, and fire insurance problems. Come in and get acquainted with him, the West's leading auto insurance carrier. Save money, insure with Farmers Insurance Group. And then there's a photo. There's a photo of him on here, and he's young. He looks like in his early 30s, and he is smiling. So I will put that up on the show notes so everyone can see. But thanks to Clark for finding that little tidbit. It had been in my binder of information. I hadn't really had a chance to talk about it, but I think it fit well into this episode.
Absolutely. And him being an insurance agent, he would know if people were dying and cashing in their life insurance policies and therefore getting their Social Security numbers. What do you think about that? I
know. First thing I thought is, oh, he started out selling insurance and then went to a credit bureau. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, a plethora of Social Security numbers available to you there, huh?
Absolutely. Like a kid in a candy store. So, Mark, I am thrilled yet sad to report that episode 14 is going to be probably our final episode. Oh my God, I know, but I am working on a passion project within this project, and we are excited to present this to you in episode 14. And it's going to bring a lot of closure and healing. And just when you thought everything in this story has been told, I have more information, and we are going to conclude, but that probably still won't be our last episode as we get more information. And between other stories that we cover, we will be providing updates.
Fantastic. I can't wait. And it truly is going to be a fun last episode that we'll cover that you've been working on for sure.
Yes.
So, Sonya, tell us how people can support the podcast and how they can contribute to some funding that we're looking for.
So thanks, Mark, for asking. I'm going to be putting something here on the show notes. There is already a thing on there that says support the show, but I'm going to put a specific link and have people, you can support by putting in $1. You can put as much as you want, but for what we're going to be doing in episode 14 is announcing this project that I'm working on, and anybody who wants to contribute to make this happen. It just helps out with any administrative costs. I mean, we do independently run this podcast. We are not under any type of large media company or anything, and it is a labor of love. But people, they want to support and they want to be a part of it. And if you've known the girls, or even if you don't and you love this story and you want to chip in, by all means, we will be supplying a link that you can do that. And gratitude and much appreciation to everyone who is considering.
For sure. Absolutely.
So, Marek, I think that is a wrap for today.
Thanks for doing the show, Sonya. Thanks, everyone, for listening, and we'll catch you on our next episode of Investigated.
Thanks, Mark. Talk to you next week.
Take care. Bye.
Thank you so much for listening. Please be sure to follow Investigated on Apple Podcast, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also visit our website at investigatedpod.com to learn more about your hosts, Sonya Paz and Marek Kaspczyk. Follow us on social media and connect with us. Investigated is written, edited, and hosted by me, Sonya Paz, with story input and advisement from Marek Kaspczyk. And many thanks to the research of criminologist Clark Williams and to Allison Betts Goldman for her contributions to this story. If you'd like to support our show, visit our website. And if you'd like to give us a 5-star review on Apple iTunes, we would always appreciate that because extra podcast love is amazing. It also helps us get more visibility from fabulous listeners like you. Thanks again, and see you next time.